Okay, I'll start from the beginning. Okay, hopefully people online will hear me now. All right, so where was I? I was talking about families not lasting through to the fourth generation. So every 100 family business starting today, there's only 16 that last through to the fourth generation. Right, so that's quite a shocking statistic. Right, so there's many challenges and risks, along the way. So most families that we work with are now second generation handing over to third generation. That's normally where challenges start appearing. First to second generation, not necessarily, just depending on how many kids there are in the family, because that's normally where the issues occur. But just quickly here, so this question, the question here that was asked is which of the following policies and procedures, if any, do you have in place? Okay, so 75% of businesses have something in place, but my view is that's not good enough, right? Because something is not good enough. It needs to be comprehensive. It needs to be holistic. And so if you go through the different things here, shareholders agreement, 45%, testament and will, 41%, dividend policy, 29%, family constitution, 19%, and there's conflict resolution measures, 12%, entry and exit provision, 14%. It compares, more or less with your global peer group. But the other thing that's striking in this is look how low these percentages are as well. And so if we look at the other question we ask families is, what are your long-term goals, right? And then people say to us, okay, well, protect the business as the most important family asset, 88%, create a legacy, 81%, create dividends for family members, 71%. But if you then go back to that previous slide, well, only 29% of them have a dividend policy in place. 19% has a family constitution in place. So whilst they want the family business to last through generations, they don't actually have the measures in place and the tools in place to ensure that that happens, right? And one of those things that we work with families on is to write a family constitution that enables the family, and the business family to work through all of the issues and actually to preempt some of the issues that will come up, and to put measures in place to deal with it when it arises. One thing that's for sure, and for those of you that are in a family business, is conflict. I mean, it's going to happen. I mean, you can love your brother or your sister, your parents, to the ends of the earth, but conflict is going to arise. We'll talk about it a bit later. We call it the family business Bermuda Triangle. So love, power, and money. Those three things will always cause an issue within a family business. Okay, so we covered that bit here. So this where we looked at here is where the family values and the sense of company, right, had an impact or helped families through the pandemic. Okay, so you'll see here, and there's a clear correlation. Okay, so on this side, what we ask them is whether these points on this side helped you through the pandemic, marginal help, and no assistance whatsoever. So the question here was the family that owns the business has a clear set of family values. 76% said they had, and 73% of those agreed that that certainly assisted them throughout the pandemic. And the same with this question here, the family has a clear sense of agreed values and purpose as a company. 75% and 74% of them said it helped them throughout the pandemic. But the interesting point here is that whilst that percentage is so high in terms of the set family values, only 41% of them had their values and company mission down in written form. So why is this important? I'm working with a family up in the Highveld, big family. There's 4 brothers. They are now second generation, and their kids. There's quite a lot of kids. I think there's probably about 10 kids between the 4 of them. Those kids are all either in university or just left university. One of the biggest challenges that they have at the moment is to bring those kids back into the family business. And why that is the case is that over the last maybe 10, 15 years, they've stopped having family events. So what Harry, the brother, that's the MD, told me, he said that when they were kids, they regularly sat with their father, around the fire, having a braai, whatever the case was, and he would tell them stories about, how he started the business and some of the issues that they've had, and that sort of created, you know, that connection with the business, from the family side. As things carried on, they had some conflict in the family, so those things stopped. And so now they have the third generation. Nobody's actually interested in the business. Nobody really knows what goes on there, because they're not interested. So now they want to bring that back into the family. It's difficult, right? Because people have moved on, they've lost interest. All they really care about is their distribution they're going to get, and if they don't get the distribution, then conflict, right? So that's a challenge for us to work through, that to actually bring that family back, back together again. Because the legacy is important, right? So when you have your values, company mission, etc., in written form, that's something that the whole family can, refer back to. It's a very soft thing, but it's so important within a family business, right? Because it's there for generations. So if you don't carry that across in generations, legacy gets lost. Eventually, the business will close down. Right, so digitalization, I won't dwell on this for too long. What we tried to establish here is whether there was a correlation between digital capabilities, effective decision making, and sustainability. The answer is yes. Right, so the higher the digitalization of the organization, I think it goes without saying, surely you'll be able to make decisions faster, because information gets to you quicker. But the interesting point was that for those that said they were digitally there, right? They also, 72% of them said, they ensured sustainability is at the heart of everything that we do. That's quite an interesting, correlation. Um, I'm still not 100% sure why that correlation is there between digital and sustainability, but that's what the survey, told us. The other things here at the bottom just really refers to they're more agile, and of course, they performed better, as well. Right. So let's just come back to African family business perspective. And I think this will not be a surprise to anyone. If you look at this here, so um, only 62% of family business during the pandemic enabled their staff to work from home in Africa, whereas that is 80% globally. Right. So infrastructure is not there in Africa, so people can't really work from home. And also, if you look at how behind African family business are in terms of digitalization, that also plays a role into that. Mm. Um, Look, I think not necessarily, right? You'd think farming here is big, in terms of family businesses, but if you go to America, there are huge family businesses there that own farms. If you look at Dangote, for example, a big African family business out of Nigeria. I mean, they're a conglomerate, right? So they cement, they do all sorts of other things, right? Um, so so it's difficult. I think what it is, you've got first world versus third world or developing world, right? I think that's probably what where the difference is. And then there's no infrastructure, or when the infrastructure is there, the lights aren't always on, right? Like here. So okay, um, sustainability. So the point here is family businesses like to in Africa like to give back to community. So it's a philanthropic initiative. So when you ask the African family businesses, right? So what do you do about sustainability or ESG as we refer to it? They'll all say to you, yeah, no, we are all over it. But when you compare that to what happens in the rest of the world, as I said earlier on, those family businesses have actually made sustainability, as part of their business operation, right? So it's imperative. It's part of business. It's not a nice to have. It's not something that you do because it makes you feel good. Okay, so they've moved away from just giving back to community, but they are also doing it as part of the business. So as I've mentioned earlier on, when it comes to carbon emissions, they focus on reducing their carbon footprint. In Africa, it's not the case. And I'll show you here. So what this slide does, so we've asked people, what are your key priorities over the next 2 years? The green is everything relating to sustainability here at the bottom. Right, but you can see those percentages: 17%, 15%, 14%, 7%. Key priorities: expanding into new markets, increasing use of new technologies, introducing new products and services, and rethinking or changing, adapting the business model. And I'm pretty sure that's because of what happened, with COVID across the world. Right. So again, it's low. Globally, it's also lower percentages there. But it's one of the key findings that we've had. Family business leaders say that they are ready to take the lead. I think the survey shows about 63% of family business leaders said yes. We'll take the lead on sustainability. But when it actually comes down to them having it, written down or having it in a strategy that's communicated, it's just not there. And you can see there, 36% have a developed and communicated sustainability strategy. And let's link that back to what I said earlier on in terms of creating a legacy. Now, this is becoming real issues, at the moment. So if you really want to create a legacy, what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want your legacy to be? Something that tells a good story in terms of how you've looked after the environment, or the opposite. And when you look at the next generation that's coming through into family businesses now, this is very important to them. Spoke to a family business recently where the dad that runs the business, he says to me, well, we're making money, we're making a good profit, and we're paying distributions to the family members, and surely that's what it's all about. You ask his kids, not the case. The kids want their business to be far more kinder to the environment, right? And to have more sustainability practices. So family businesses have the opportunity to take the lead in this. When you compare them to corporates have taken the lead in this, especially in Europe, first world countries, where they've been forced to report on their ESG measures. Family businesses aren't required to report on it, but the most aren't. And that's what our research says, that that's where we think they've actually lagged behind it, but they will have to step up the game. Otherwise, that will certainly not be a good legacy that they leave. Okay, I think I've covered all of those. We've spoken about giving back to local community. All right, so those were just some highlights from our survey. As I said, these things are still relevant. Even though it was done a year and a bit ago, a lot of these things, if you go back to the previous survey, which was done in 2018, when it comes to the corporate governance in families, that is still the same, right? So professionalizing family businesses. That's what we do. That's what we help family businesses to achieve. In order to get that 16%, get that curve coming back up again. And so that's what we do as an organization. Sense of sustainability of a business and a family business that is predominantly, let's say, white owned, and now you have to look at black ownership. Pressures from customers, etc., to bring black ownership in. Maintain the family business, but the challenge of bringing black ownership in. Was that a survey, or was that assessed in terms of how families or family businesses are sort of overcoming that challenge? Yeah, so Keith, we didn't specifically ask that, but I can share with you what I see when I work with families. Yesterday I was in Pretoria, big farming family that own the whole value chain in that specific area of of what they do, and they are now looking at how they can bring black ownership into their structure. All families talk about it, right? Because it becomes almost a license to operate in South Africa, right? So without it, you will stay small. So it's certainly something that we say, all get smaller, absolutely, or you don't exist anymore, right? So. Exactly. And the other issue that you have in South Africa is a lot of next generation has left the country or are planning to leave. So parents are sitting here with great businesses and they've got nobody to give it to. So the only way that they what they can do is they sell it. right? Or they close it down even, which is not what you want, right? You at least want that to continue, sell it to somebody else to take the business. But that's a real issue in South Africa is, who do you pass it on to if your kids don't want to come back? All right. Um, hmm? We'll get to that actually in a bit, Keith. It's not. It depends where you are. In the business. Are you second generation, third generation? If you move down the generations, you almost get to a cousin consortium, right? We've got all the different branches of family. Then it becomes harder if everybody works in the business, right? But I did a case study the other day on an Indian business, and everybody works in that business, right? And it's gone through to the fifth generation, and the business looks after everyone. But the challenge there is the family is growing faster than what the business is growing, and the business is supposed to look after the family. So they've got a real challenge because the family's actually going to suck the business dry. So is it important for the family to work in the business? Well, I'll say yes and no. It depends on whether those family members actually have the skill set to work in the business. You don't work in the business just because you are a family member, right? Because that is a recipe for disaster. But to retain the legacy and the values of the family, in the business, yes, it's important that retain, remains in the business, not necessarily because of getting a family member to work in the business. There are other means to do that, but we will get to that. So what we do with families is really future-proofing families for the future, right? So we want them to go generation to generation to generation. I mentioned this early on. This is just the number of families that we talk to, they will all say to you, yes, we know it's important to have rules in place, succession plans in place. Yeah, absolutely. But then you ask them, okay, so what is the succession plan? Oh no, my eldest will take over the business. Have you actually spoken to them? Do they want to come work in the business? Do they actually have the skill set? And then I said, no, but it's my eldest son or daughter, or one of the other siblings that I think will want to work in the business and take over the business. So it doesn't work like that, because we know that next generation doesn't necessarily want to go and work in family businesses. As we were talking earlier on, they all want to become TikTok millionaires overnight. Right. So interesting statistic, family business account for 50% of the economic growth in South Africa, right? So it's quite high. We've got statistics around, the employment that it creates, and it's, one of the largest, employees, if you like, in South Africa. So important that they last. Yes, just some names of family businesses, both in South Africa and globally. Samsung family business started with a family. Swarovski. I'm sure you recognize some of these names, and we work with most of these families. Right. So the important thing here is what we want to show here is there needs to be balance between how you manage family, right, and how you manage the business. So if there's not balance between these two, then either going to have conflict here that's going to create your business to fall over, or the business will run away and won't really have any values that the family have in the business. So we've got a platform that we use called Owner's Agenda. We actually work with families. It's quite a nice digital platform. When you discuss each one of these aspects of these wheels, but it's really important that there's equilibrium between the two. So when we look at what is a family business in our context, of course it needs to be a business. There needs to be a family that has dominant ownership. So dominant ownership, right? So they don't have to own all of it. Where families exit, or there's an exit, a transaction, if they still retain control within the listed company, if we still regard that as a family business, right? And of course, multi-generational approach. So there needs to be the intent to hand it over to the next generation. So that's in our context what we see as a family business, right? So I spoke about this earlier on, but just look at this, right? So in your second generation, 40% of businesses don't exist anymore, and it goes down to 32, 16. I actually don't know what it would be in fifth, but it's certainly not a good statistic. Okay, so why do we see family businesses are different, right? So what we've done here, we just compare family business to a public corporate. Some of these things are um, you know pretty straightforward. Of course, family business, single dominant owner. Public companies, you've got fragmented shareholders. Um, you've got family members that are the owners, and you've got investors, right? So this is quite important actually because this causes different issues. So in a corporate organization, what do investors want? Short-term returns, right? And they're after profit. Families not necessarily after profit, right? So they want that business to be there for the kids and the kids and the kids after that, right? So they're not necessarily focused on short-term and gains, and that in itself is what creates some of the issues that we have. But so what are the advantages of that, right? Is continuity. Um, you know, there's loyalty, there's trust, within the family. Um, but of course, these things bring risks, right? So family conflicts, like we mentioned, normally families struggle with access to capital as well. There's dominant ownership, which has an advantage, but also it has a risk, right? So abuse of power or incompetence, right? So putting a family member in a managerial role in the business just because they are a family member, it doesn't work. Creates conflict. It's not good for the business, not good for the other employees. And then, of course, the multi-generational approach. I spoke a little bit about this earlier, the Bermuda Triangle. Um, and yeah, so these things, love, power, and money, creates conflict. I mean, it goes without a saying, right? So, you know, um, and if you look at these things on the outside, all about control, right? So who controls? So especially when you go into sibling partnerships, bigger families, right? So who actually controls the business? Who has the most say, over the business itself? Employment of family members, we sort of touched on quickly. Compensation, a big issue. Transfer of shares, right? So when you exit, who can you sell to? The existing family members that are there, do they have to pay for it immediately? How do you finance it, etc. So family at the moment up in the Lowveld, classic example where dad started that business many years ago. He acquired some of the best farming land, just outside of Nelspruit. And when he passed away, two beneficiaries in the trust was his two daughters. The one daughter, she matriculated and went over to the UK. The other daughter stayed behind. She ran the farm. Um, she had, or she has, son and a daughter. The one son, became involved in running the family, the farm, and the daughter's husband actually he's involved as well. 25 years after her sister left South Africa, her sister decided she wants a share of the business and she wants it paid out. So there was no written rule or agreement in terms of exit. So she insisted and went to court. She insisted that she get paid out a 50% based on market value, and she wanted the money straight away. So what the poor family had to do, they had to sell the best farm in order to pay that. So they are now left with small little portion that was left over, which has devastated them, right? So they are now having to rebuild. What Jenny said to me is, she actually attended one of our sessions. I think it was about 3 years ago, and Des Verree, my PwC colleagues, you'll remember who Des is. He spoke about putting constitution in place, putting the rules down for these things, and they thought, oh yeah, okay, yeah, nice to have, and they didn't do it, and this has now come to bite them. So we've worked with them through a process to get it right now. So they've learned through through a very terrible experience. Pushing at the back. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Mm. No, absolutely. Yeah. And so, the fact that it's family doesn't mean it's going to be okay, right? So we don't have to formalize anything here because, of course, the family is going to look after it. No, it doesn't work like that. Time and again, it's proven that if there's not a family constitution in place and these things aren't formalized, it creates conflict and the business gets sold or closes down. Okay, so I just want to share this one model that we use to predict family conflict. So we call it the 3D model. Let me just get everything back on the screen quickly. Okay, so what we do, we've got these three axes. So investment structure, governance structure, and ownership structure. And what we do with families, we'll plot them along these lines, right? So see what we've done here in this specific instance. This is a family managed business. So the family members work in the family. They're also the owners. They are focused. So this is normally a family business that's pretty mature. So it's moved probably from the first to the second generation, and it's siblings that's running the business. And the next example we have is, and this is probably in the third generation, where it's just moved down these axes. Further you move along these, the bigger the challenges are, right? So you can see if you're here in the middle, owner managed, you've just started the business, you're very entrepreneurial, you're the sole owner, you can control everything, less issues. As soon as you start moving down, these various axes, the challenges come. And so, we've done research around this, and we can predict some of these issues that you will find. Right. So let's look at some examples here quickly. Right. So, in a sibling partnership, sibling rivalry. Yeah. If I look at my in-laws and their family business, the two brothers, they love each other dearly, but you can always see a bit of rivalry there. It's healthy rivalry in this case, in their family. Um, Entrepreneurial spirit, this seems to peter out as you go through generations. And there's, of course, ways that you can ensure that entrepreneurial initiatives or ideas remains within the family business, right? So what we get families to do here is, especially your bigger families, is to create almost like a venture capital arm, if you like, right? But not to that extent. But they get the kids to come to them with their ideas, and they will happily invest in those ideas to give that child the opportunity to go and do something different. But by investing in that, they keep it within the family as a whole. And if it takes off and it becomes the next, TikTok or Tesla, then at least the family still has, an investment in that, but they're also involved in it. But at the same time, it provides the child with an opportunity to pursue what they want to do if they don't want to come into the family business. Right? You've got life cycle risk in the product, right? So if it's very one-dimensional, things move very fast these days, and if you don't diversify quick enough, your business might stagnate and not grow anymore. And of course, when it's family managed, you can see there the conflicts between active and non-active owners. And this diagram actually sets it out very nicely. So what we have here, these three circles, this is owner, this is if you're in the business, and this is if you are a family member. So we use this model as well just to demonstrate to families the different roles that you play, right? So you can be when you're a family member and you're an owner and you're in the business, you sit here in the middle. And this is normally the patriarch or the matriarch that sits here. You can imagine that person needs to deal with all the different conflicts and different stakeholders that they need to manage. The other big issue that we find is that family members that are owners that aren't involved in the business, so they sit over here, right? So these family members, they become reliable or reliant on distributions that's paid out of the family business. And when those distributions suddenly or dividends suddenly stops because there was a decision made here to reinvest money into the business, big problem, right? And so the communication and the transparency of what goes on in the business is so important to family members that are dependent on what comes out of the business itself. this particular family I visited yesterday in Pretoria. So it's two brothers and the dad. Because this is a very large business, a couple of $1 billion worth of rands worth of business. And there's two sisters. The sisters get their distribution, every year, but they are not involved in the business at all. But their husbands are both consultants and knows a lot about business, right? So now I sit down with Gerard yesterday, and he said, okay, so we need to do something to give information to his sisters because they need to know what's going on, but he doesn't want to give them too much information because then the brother-in-law is going to come tell him how to run the business, right? So, and you can see the influence that they will have on their spouses as well, and that comes into the business, right? And causes the conflict within the family. Now, there are ways to work around it, which we'll come back to in a minute. And just the other thing that what did I do now? There you go. I just want to go back to this slide here. And of course, when you look at big family dynasties, there's a family investment office. It's family owned, but the family's not really involved in that so much anymore. And a dynasty. And you can imagine what happens there. So the Packer family that I worked with, that family office, was massive. I think they employed probably around 40 people. They had various investments, portfolios. They had a whole big venture capital arm as well. And the family itself was so far removed from that, completely, because they appointed professional managers to run it for them. Now, again, that in itself can create some challenges because if you don't get the right professional managers to run that, they can destroy the family legacy. But also, it can be really good to have outside people come in to run the business or the family office because they bring different skills into the business, which you may or may not have seen as a family member. Okay, so this is what we do with families and how we work with them, right? So we build their house, which we call the owner strategy, and these are rooms in their house, 6 rooms. These are the foundational rooms. At the bottom here, membership, goals and values, owner business model, and these are the building blocks, of the whole owner strategy. So when we work with families, we go through each one of those rooms and we get everybody around the table, right? So the first session that we do here on membership is, the question we ask is who can become a shareholder or beneficiary. But before we do that, we actually agree with the family who's going to come to these sessions, right? Because who do you want around the table? Do you want only bloodline family? Do you want spouses? Or, and there's no right answer to this. Some families bring everybody. Other families says, no, let's just keep it to bloodline family and we, go through this process just with them. But one of the important things right from the outset is this question, who can become a shareholder or beneficiary of the business? So a classic example that we have here, that I've dealt with twice now with families is adopted children, right? So some families take a very, very hard line, right? Only bloodline can benefit from the family business. That's it, and no one else. It makes it easier because that's a rule. Might sound harsh, but that's it. Business was set up by your grandfathers years ago. It was meant for the family, bloodline family only. Other families where there might be adopted children already, will be comfortable for adopted children if they were adopted before they were 5 years old to benefit from the family business, and the dividends and distributions later on. But again, it's up to the family to make that decision. Where we help them is to just talk through those things and to actually ask those difficult questions, and to facilitate that discussion. The other thing here is really important is succession principles. You remember the survey results we looked at earlier on. Only 19% of family business had a constitution in place. There's another statistics, only 26% of family business actually have a succession plan in place. Without that succession plan, you're going to end up in that statistic of only 16% being there after the 4th generation, right? So we work with the families around this, around succession. Right? So there may not be somebody in the family that is suited to take over from whoever's running the business at the moment, right? Whether it's the mum or the dad, that's sort of the CEO of the business. there might not be somebody in the next generation. So you can't just make an assumption that one of the kids would take over, because that may not happen. And then if something happens, as you've mentioned earlier on, right? If something happens to that person, who's going to take over? And if you've don't have a succession plan in place, then everything goes into limbo. So what a lot of families do here is they'll give all the kids an opportunity to express an interest if that's something that they want to do, and they will then actually build a career path for that person to work in various parts of the business in order for them to eventually take over as the CEO or the managing director. A lot of the other things that we see here is some families, before the kids can come and work in the business, they need to go work somewhere else for 3 years. Right? Some families will actually mandate their kids to get a tertiary qualification before they come back into the business. Again, there's no wrong or right. The advantage of getting your kids to come back into the business after they've worked somewhere else is they bring fresh ideas into your business. Maybe those ideas are good or not. You think it will be good because you only know what you know, right? You don't know what you don't know, right? If they bring new ideas in, it's fantastic for the growth of the business. Right, the next one is really goals and values. I spoke about this a little bit earlier on, especially around legacy. So what is your history and your identity? This is really, really important to keep the family together. Without understanding where the business came from, how hard the founders of the business actually worked, where it started, there's no real appreciation for what they've gone through to create the business, right? So, and very important for that to last for, or to be there for future generations. The other important question here is what can the business expect of the family, and what can the family expect of the business? So if the family only expects distributions from the business, we've got a problem, right? If the business doesn't expect of the family to be involved in the business, then you also have a problem, right? So you need to get balance between these things. Certainly the purpose of having a family business is to provide for future generations, right? So, or to provide for the current generation. So you want to be able to pay dividends, so that the family can expect that from the business, but you can't expect that from the business, in difficult times, right? So you need to have those things flushed out, have the rules written so everybody can understand what that means. The owner business model is we really go into the business in itself. What is your approach to opportunity and risk? And especially here where you have family members, owners of business that's not working in the business, versus those that are working in the business that want to expand, and they want to take an investment or take half of the available cash and put it into Bitcoin, right? The family members that aren't involved, they'll see that as a risk, right? So because that might not impact my distribution that I'm going to get. So put rules around that so that family's wealth is not put at unnecessary risk. Also, financing strategy. The business I've mentioned earlier on, Harry and their business up in the Lowveld, they've got a set leveraging percentage, debt to equity ratio that they have in all of their businesses, right? And they've set that, at 60%, and everybody adheres to that. And that's also based on their dividend policy and a lot of other things that they've put in place, right? So this really is all about the business, how the business functions, and decisions around that. Corporate governance. And we asked early on, does the family members have to work in the business? These are the things that we look at, right? Employment of family members. How do they get compensated? You get compensated as an employee based on market rates, and you get compensated as an owner, through dividends and distributions. What goes wrong here is that all family members get paid the same regardless of what you do in the business, because that's not fair. And you get paid more because you're a family member than a non-family member that does the same job in the business. So that creates conflict in the business. If everybody gets paid the same from the family, that creates conflict on the family side, right? So remuneration policies needs to be agreed on as insofar it relates to family. And then, dividends, transfer of shares that I mentioned earlier on. Have a dividend policy so people, the family members, everybody knows what that policy is, and they know that they'll be getting, a distribution, every year. Family governance. This comes down to a couple of things I've mentioned earlier on. So how do you get the next generation involved in the business, or not necessarily involved in business, but how can they understand what's going on in the business, right? So do you have family days? It's interesting. Those families that have a family day, how the cohesion is so different to those that have neglected that, because everybody gets too busy. Family members are all over the country and they actually don't make an effort to get everybody together, like the example I shared with you earlier on. So we help the family to get to an agreement on those type of softer things. Somebody in the family that's not in the business actually takes ownership of it and organizes family days. And then communication as well. What information is shared with family members, non-family members, bigger organizations? Do you have a social media policy in place? Not only in the business, but with the family as well, right? The example that we had, one of my colleagues worked with a family down in the Western Cape where farming a farmer again, and they were looking at buying the land next door, the farm next door, and they were talking about it over the table at dinner. One of his kids heard this. Everyone discussed. It was open. The kid went to school, told people at school, "Oh, my dad's looking at buying the farm next door." Big issue ensued. As a result of that, right? So again, you think, you know, share everything with the family, but those kids, I mean, they you know, didn't do it deliberately, right? But it caused an issue in that instance. So business is business, family is family, right? And then lastly, yep. Mm. Yeah. 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 No, yeah, no, we absolutely see families do that. And then, of course, the family will pay. They'll put funds aside to bring everybody, together. Of course, it's harder when people live everywhere in the world, but the really successful families, they make the effort and they do it. Um, and then when they come together, when it's a wedding or a funeral, then everyone says, "Oh, we don't see each other enough. We should really make an effort to see each other more." And then you'll wait for the next funeral, right? Or wedding, I should say, right? Let's be positive. All right, so family counselor is also an interesting concept. All right, so similar to what you have a board of directors running the business, you have a family counselor that looks after the family. And we normally advise families to get a independent person on the family council, but a good family friend that understands the family, its values, what the family is all about. And the family counselor is really just there to manage, the family and how they deal with the business and not business, right? So it's the family, its interaction with each other, and the decisions that they need to make. Let's say, for argument's sake, there's been an issue with one of the family members in terms of what they've done in the business, right? So what is the family going to particular issue? The business will deal with that because it's got rules and regulations. But what does the family do? Does the family now decide to completely exclude that person, or not, whatever the case might be? So that's what the family council is there to do, and also really just to keep everybody together. Right. So when we work with families with this process, these are the three things that we try to achieve: professionalize the members of the business family. So remember, we do these in workshops, right? They normally take about 4 hours per room, and you work with all members of the family, and it's a process you go through. So that process in itself actually helps family members to understand business a bit more, and for those that are just business minded, get them to understand family dynamics a bit more. I was actually laughing yesterday. Somebody asked me, "So do you guys do marriage consultation as well?" And stay away from that. You can easily get trapped in those things. So create an experience for improvement of family dynamics, and then in the end, we help the family to develop the content for their family constitution, right? So so this is the end game, or the end product of the whole process that we'll work with the family, right? So you can go online and type family constitution, and you're going to find a family constitution all written up for you. You can just put your family name at the top and your family emblem, and yeah, that's your constitution, but that's going to end up in a drawer and nobody's going to even blink an eye or even know that it exists. When you go through this comprehensive process, that document becomes your document. We actually don't write it. So we give all the content for the writing of the document, and we normally get somebody in the family to own that document so they can write it in their own language. And the end of the whole process, we then get everybody to sign that document. It's not legally binding, it's morally binding, but there are a lot of the decisions that you make in there that can become legally binding when you write it into a shareholders agreement or you write it into the MOI of the business, such as exit clauses and those kind of things, right? So a lot of decisions you make that you can put across. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, yeah, and that's why you have to. So those kind of things you write into a shareholders agreement, in that becomes a legal instrument that you can enforce. Yeah. Yeah, and then we normally have a big ceremony with the family, and those days are actually quite nice when everybody now sits around the table, they sign up to the Constitution. You've gone through some difficult conversations with family members, but for us to see everybody on the same page and agreeing to everything is a great thing to see. So what we want to achieve is that warm hearts and deep pockets, with families, right? So for some of the families, this is easy to achieve, or easier than other, I should say. Big families like the toy group that we worked with. That's a big family. You have 20 people around the table. It's difficult to work with that. Because people, all have different ideas. Smaller families, you might have 3, 4 people around the table. The process goes a lot quicker. But that's what we want to achieve. Because in the end, if everybody is happy, and the business is making lots of money, everybody's going to be happy, overall. All right, so that's everything that I wanted to cover. Are there any other questions or observations? Mm, 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 mm. Mm. Yes, that's a good point, Charlotte. So that constitution is a dynamic document, right? So we suggest to families that they revisit that at least every 5 years, right? But more frequently, and then have the family. I talked about the family council. So put it through that mechanism where family sits around the table and then address arcade comments or statements or decisions that were made that's in the constitution and update it, because things do change. It absolutely changes. Mm. But and especially if you have that first generation still involved, because they don't want to move away from what grandpa or grandmom said, right? But things do change, and the families need to accept that, because if you keep on doing it in that way, the business is not going to survive. And remember, it's a morally binding document, right? So so we say from the outset with the families when we start writing the constitution is living document. It has to change, because something you write today is not going to be relevant in 20 years or 30 years time. So you make revision in it as well in the constitution. Question about it. It's a very slow trend of ticking upwards, but it's almost negligible. So I think we should hammer it more. Yeah, but I think families, just because it's family, right? So we're doing business, it's family, everything is going to be okay, right? So exactly. Yeah. Yeah, but it is. But you because especially when there's second and third generation. I mean, you can imagine when other branches of the family become involved, values change, right? Because their spouses might be different, so they are influenced differently. So, um, yeah, I don't know where there's not a uptake. The only thing that I can think of is that people think because we're operating within the family, it's all great, and you only hear about these, the big families, where they strife or issues, and they have to sell off, their assets. But it happens. It happens with all families. No question about it. Hmm. Yeah, 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 absolutely. No, there aren't, and it creates complexity, right? But that's why some families just take hard line, blood family only in the business. That's it. Because you imagine, the conflict that will arise if both a husband and wife work in the business and there's a divorce. So what do you do now, right? So there's now conflict within the family. You can't kick the other person out of the business, right? Because they've got a right to work there. So some families just say, that's it. Only blood family work in the business, and the spouses, you don't work there. That's a hard line to take, right? Because what if the spouse is there without a job and there's clearly a role available in the business, right? But if you've got something written like that in your family constitution, Charlotte, to your point early on, the family needs to get together and make that decision, as a whole, in order to bring that person in. We will advise them, they, don't do that because it might be the right answer now. It's not the right answer necessarily for the long term, especially if you want your business to last through generations. Um, a lot of families are successful in that, so there's no hard and fast rule. It's what the family in the end decides what to do. When there's stepchildren involved, um, or illegitimate children involved, again, you hear these stories where somebody out of the blue suddenly has a claim on an inheritance that nobody in the family ever knew about, right? Those things happen, but getting all those things out on the table is not easy. Yeah, and as you say, it's head in the sand type of thing. And that's why we stand and we ask those hard questions because we don't have any emotional attachment to the family, right? So, we will ask the question. Of course, you handle it, with care and be sensitive about those things. I have a recent example where husband and wife in the meeting just had to go at each other. So we've got red cards. So I pulled out that red card very quickly and said, okay, right, let's stop this. Um, take a 5-minute break. And then I'll just go talk to both people, individually. Because in the end, the goal is to come to agreement, right? But families are not always inclined to agree on things straight away. So maybe I should take a course in marriage counseling. But my colleague Andrea Benkenstein, she works with me in the Family Business Center of Excellence. She actually has qualifications in psychology, and she's done a number of other coaching, courses and qualifications as well to assist with those issues. Mm, exactly. Yeah. 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 Exactly. And that's what we correct. And so families that come to you and say, "Oh, my sister just claimed half of the assets and sold it. What do we do?" Well, you can't do much about it because it's already happened. They learn from experience. But I think maybe that's also the reluctance for families to do it, right? Because everything is running smoothly, there's cohesion. Why should I worry about it now? But if you don't worry about it now, it's going to cause issues further down the track. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. Yeah. 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 Mm. Yeah. Yep. Mm. 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 Yeah. 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 So let me share interesting observation with you with that. So when there's mum and dad in the business, right? The dads normally the first thing they'll ask is, "What's the fee?" The mums, because they look, yeah, they're more concerned about keeping the family together. Like that, the cost to them is irrelevant, right? Our fees aren't 10 million. I wish. I wish. Yeah. Well, okay, yeah, that goes to start. Yeah, so it's there's no real return in terms of a monetary return that you get from doing this, right? But it's the emotional return that you get. And yeah, it's difficult for families to understand that. But yeah, as I say, it's the females in the family are more inclined to do this because they want people to work. They want the family to stay together. Where their male counterparts are different. They want okay, so how many hours you're going to be busy with this? What is going to be the cost? And fix the fee. You know. Hmm. Well, exactly. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, correct. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Mm, 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 mm. Yeah. No, yeah, yeah, it happens, right? Because the families don't want to give away ownership, right? But there are different ways to structure that compensation. You know, you can structure it in such a way that's a phantom option against the value of the business as it grows, right? So families won't easily give away ownership, to somebody externally. Doesn't happen that easily. So it's important to bring those skills in when it's not within the family, but to give away, shares, families are reluctant to do that. So I'm not surprised. They may promise it, but they don't. Yeah, when it comes to the day to actually give it away. Mm, yeah, yeah, but it's bringing the external expertise in house to maybe get the kids, train them up to actually take over eventually. The other dynamic when you bring a outsider into the family business is whether that person's values align with yours. All right. So if you bring in a CEO, the CEOs want to put their own stamp on things, right? And they will normally, have a 5-year horizon of how they're going to make this place the biggest and greatest and best business that will destroy the family, right? Because they want to put their own stamp on it. So there needs to be alignment of values. You need to get the right person in to do it. So when it comes to interviewing, doing personality tests on that individual that you want to bring in, that's you know, really, really important. Mm. Hmm. Yeah, that happens a lot. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it's difficult, right? I recently had a family that came to me. The kids are already in their 50s, pushing 60. The dad is still involved, does not want to let go at all. And so what we did was, I eventually went and I spoke, to the dad, but that was sort of, they prepped him for, it's time to let go. Let's talk to the professionals. But they said to me beforehand, you can't tell me anything. So don't go in there with your fancy suit and think you're going to tell him otherwise, because you won't. Right? So that's fine. Go and we help facilitate that discussion, and getting him to actually understand, well, if you don't let go, this is what's going to happen. But that's, it's not an easy discussion. So you actually help that the generation that's taking over, you help them to convince that person. And so you need to have somebody else in the family that helps that discussion with the matriarch or patriarch. um, but the thing that gets them across the line normally is if you just show them the statistics of what's going to happen. But the other thing is, they don't want to let go because they still want to know what's going on in the business. Right? And again, there's structures that you set up that keeps them involved in the business. Easy example, you put them on the board and you make them an independent director, and they attend board meetings. So they still see what's happening in the business. They can still have a say. As they get older, maybe, bring them in as a consultant. So there's ways to structure it that they are still involved, because they don't want to let go, because that's the baby that they've created. Um, but it is difficult. But that's the demise of businesses, right? When the older generation doesn't want to let go. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your attention. And it was really nice, having the discussion with you. I'm glad it wasn't just death by PowerPoint. So, yeah, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.